there is one more question, which is, what are different types of legislations in India? We will see this. Okay, so the term legislation, it's derived from two words, legis and letum. Legis means law, letum means making. So legislation is nothing but the process of law making, making of laws. Amongst, when we talk about different sources of law, from where law has originated, from where we derive the law, legislation is also considered as one of the very important sources of law. Okay, so it is one of the most important instruments of governance, and it also helps in maintaining peace and order in the society, because it's mostly legislation from where we are deriving the laws at present day situation. We have thousands of legislations which are applicable in India, and by looking at the legislation, we know what provisions apply and what provisions are not applicable. So it determines, among other things, the rights and responsibilities of individuals and authorities to whom the legislation applies. What are our rights? What are our responsibilities? And what are the rights and obligations of other authorities also? Everything is decided by way of these legislations only. Right? When we talk about our rights and obligations, IPC gives us some obligations that I should not cause harm to another person. Under contract, contractual obligations are fixed. Under labor laws, obligations are fixed for employer, right? Like that, we have different rights and obligations clearly specified by way of legislations. There are numerous reasons. There are numerous reasons behind the introduction of different legislations. For instance, a legislation may be enacted to direct, to approve, to endorse, to give, authorize, allow, proclaim, confine, or to enroll, etc. So there are different reasons why a legislation may be introduced. Sometimes legislation imposes powers on someone. Sometimes legislation imposes some obligations on another person. Sometimes it's there to give rights to another person. Like that, there are different purposes which a legislation fixes. Okay, sometimes just to give clarity on a certain matter might be a legislation may be there. Like we have General Clauses Act defining certain words, right? There are legislations to specify the procedure that needs to be followed in the court, like CPC, CRPC, right? So like that, we have different legislations performing different types of functions or different reasons why those legislations were being introduced. Okay, talking about the different types of legislations, we can classify it into supreme legislation and subordinate legislation. And within subordinate legislation, we have 5 more classifications. Okay, so what is supreme legislation? Supreme legislation is the legislation which is made by sovereign authority of the state. It cannot be repealed, controlled, or amended by other authority except for the one which it precedes. As in, supreme legislation means a legislation which is passed by like the legislature, like the highest lawmaking authority, it would be passed, and it can be changed only by those authorities. It cannot be changed, repealed by an authority which is subordinate to it. It is enacted by highest lawmaking body. In case of India, this is Parliament. So all the acts of Parliament are thus supreme legislation, because when Parliament passes a legislation, we cannot change that legislation by, like, state legislature cannot make changes in the legislation, right? It's only Parliament. When we talk about Constitution of India, Constitution is not made by Parliament, but there was a different committee which was formed, right? Like the Constituent Assembly. Different assembly was formed and which made the Constitution. But then power is given to Parliament, because Constituent Assembly was there only until Constitution was made applicable. But Parliament is like a permanent body, right? So that power was entrusted to Parliament, that even though it's like passed by a constituent assembly or different body altogether, parliament will have power to make changes there. Okay, so that's nothing but a supreme legislation. Constitution is an example of supreme legislation. The authority of constitution cannot be challenged by any other legislative power. However, authority of X may not be supreme. This is because in India, court of law have power to declare legislation ultra vires or unconstitutional. When we say this legislation is supreme legislation, it means that any subordinate legislature cannot make changes. If parliament today passes a legislation, a state legislature cannot say that this law is repealed, this law is void or something. Okay, so when the legislature passes a law, supreme legislature passes a law, any subordinate legislature cannot make changes there. But then judiciary is a different organ. Judiciary is given a lot of powers. So judiciary can make changes and judiciary can say that no, this legislation goes against so and so provision of constitution, so it is unconstitutional. Okay, it is called as doctrine of judicial review. As in judiciary can see whether this legislation is proper and valid or not. If it goes against provisions of constitution, then judiciary can say that this is void. Okay, so this is what supreme legislation is, that its subordinate legislature cannot declare it as void, but we have a different provision for judiciary. Courts can declare it as void if it goes against the constitution, because constitution is like the supreme law of land in India. Okay, is it clear?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, like amendments on constitution can be done only by whom, ma'am? Parliament.
Yeah.
No court can do that. Supreme Court also.
Court would not do amendment as such. Court might say that.
No, I'm asking like court might say no, ma'am, but there might be an amendment in this. Opinions, basically.
Yeah, that would be just an opinion. It depends on parliament whether they follow or not. Court keeps on saying a lot of things, that on this matter we need a legislation, this change we need in a legislation, but that's just an opinion. It depends on parliament whether they would consider it or not.
Oh.
Okay, so amendment as such, only parliament is having the power. Then we have something called as subordinate legislation. So subordinate legislation is that which proceeds from any other authority other than the sovereign power. It is made by an entity under a power delegated to it by parliament, and it is also known as delegated legislation. It is necessary for legislative powers to be delegated because it saves parliament from undue pressure. It saves time and also follows a swift action to be undertaken in cases of emergency. Examples of subordinate legislations include rules, regulations, policies, notices, proclamations, etc. There are 5 kinds of subordinate legislation that can be understood as follows: bylaws made by Delhi Municipal Corporation and Municipal Corporation of Mumbai, Delhi High Court rules governing High Court, etc. Now what happens? Parliament is like a specialized body which is having the lawmaking power. Okay, now if parliament is having power and parliament is taking care of all the laws that we need in the country, parliament will be overburdened, right? And also it would take a lot of time for simple laws also to be passed. So it's not needed that for every single law we would be bothering the parliament. And that's where the concept of delegated legislation comes. Okay, delegated legislation. Delegate means to give it to someone else. Okay, so if you are maybe like you are manager of a certain company, okay, company owner has given you some work. You cannot take care of all the work. So what you will do is you will give those work to your team members, as in you are delegating your work, you are giving it to your subordinate employees. That's nothing but delegate. Okay, so when we say delegate legislation, that means parliament is not taking care of everything, but parliament gives some powers to those other bodies that you take care of these matters, you take care of these matters. Okay, that's nothing but delegated legislation. From parliament, some powers are given to its subordinate authorities. For example, Delhi Municipal Corporation. Now, municipalities, they play a vital role, right? They also have a lot of rules, regulations that needs to be followed. In case Delhi Municipal Corporation wants to pass some rules, laws, etc., they need not get it passed from the parliament. Okay, they can make this themselves. Might be they want to ban plastic in Delhi, and if anybody is using it, they would charge this much of fine. Maybe throwing garbage on the road, this much of fine. Okay, all these are nothing but they are having the power to make the law. Okay, as such, it's not needed that it should come from the parliament, right? If we give that power to Delhi Municipal Corporation, it would save time of everyone. Also, laws can be introduced very quickly, right? So that's nothing but subordinate legislation wherein power is delegated to these bodies. How High
Okay.
Court will operate, like High Court of Delhi, how things would happen there. Okay, some procedural matters. There we need not bother the parliament again. High Court can pass some rules relating to that so that the process becomes easier and quicker. Okay, is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
So there are different kinds of subordinate legislation like colonial legislation, executive legislation, judicial legislation, legislation under local self-government, autonomous legislation. So colonial legislation. British Empire had many colonies around the world. British Crown and its parliament entrusted power of self-governance to these colonies by which colonies enacted laws. Colonial legislation was dependent for its continued existence and validity on British authorities. The British Parliament had the power to alter, repeal, or supersede any law made by these colonies. For example, law passed by Indian legislature before independence. So all these different colonies that were there, in order for those colonies to survive or to uh, for their functions to be run properly and smoothly, British government gave powers that you can make laws which would be applicable in your specific colonies. But then British government was having the power, British parliament was having the power that they could make changes in those laws also. For the purpose of operation, you make laws. But if anything is conflicting, British parliament reserved the right to make changes over there. Okay, so colonial legislation was something which used to prevail earlier times.
Okay.
Executive legislation we have. So legislature often,
Now it's like we don't have colonial legislation,
yeah,
no, ma'am?
now we don't have it.
Okay.
Okay, so what is legislature and executive? What is the difference between them?
Executive is like binding force, ma'am. Like they see whether the things are going well for like executing the law. And one more thing, ma'am.
Executive.
Yeah, that's the thing I told.
Yeah. So legislature means the lawmaking authority like parliament, state legislatures, etc. Okay, executive is like different departments that we have in India. Just so executive is what? Executive is like the different departments that we have. Okay, different departments, different ministries that we have. So what is executive legislation? Legislature often entrusts its lawmaking power to executive organs of the state. Ideally, legislature should be making the laws, but sometimes they give that power or they pass on that power to executive or the different departments also. For example, when the parliament or state legislature is not in session for meeting an emergency, the executive may proclaim an ordinance in the nature of law to tackle the problem. Okay, like the president is having the power to pass like an ordinance. Okay, it would be applicable for a certain duration only, because there is might be some situation wherein we need a law urgently. Okay, so their ordinance may be applicable, and later on when the parliament is having time, parliament would pass a law. Okay, so that's nothing but executive legislation. Executive is given the power that because you need to look into day-to-day affairs of the state, you can pass a law over there. Okay, so according to Article 13, Clause 3, Clause A of Constitution, law includes any ordinance. Order law does not only mean a legislation, but it includes a lot of other things also, like ordinance, order, bylaws, rules, regulations, notifications, customs, usages. A lot of things are included over there.
Okay.
Okay, so this is nothing but that executive is given the power that in case there is any emergency situation, in case you need a law urgently because we are not in session, you can pass a law which should be applicable for the while. That's nothing but ordinance. Okay, then we have judicial legislation. Powers delegated to judicial system to make and implement their own laws to maintain transparency in judicial system of the country. This will also ensure that there is no involvement of any other organ of the government in governance of judicial system. Like Supreme Court and High Courts are entrusted with rule-making powers for judicial administration. Judiciary is delegated with rule-making powers under Article 145 and 227 of Constitution. For example, like I mentioned, Delhi High Court rules how Delhi High Court would function. Right? We have something called as Supreme Court office procedures that is also passed by Supreme Court only, right? That how day-to-day functions would go on in the court, what would be the different formalities involved in the court. All these the courts themselves can make the laws. Okay, that's nothing but judicial legislation, and all different high courts are having their different judicial legislations applicable as well. Okay, if you visit any high court's website, there you would get all these different judicial legislations. You would get to see it. That helps them in their day-to-day functioning. Okay, is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Let's
Basically, it says that we don't need to go for like parliament for everything. We
yes,
can just make edit, no, ma'am.
correct. For every single thing, you need not bother the parliament. Okay, maybe for establishment of a court, you can bother, but how day-to-day functions would go on and all, there you need not bother the parliament.
Okay.
Like during COVID, online hearings happened, right? Everything was online. So how that online thing would happen, their courts were only taking decisions. Okay, that this we need to do, that we need to do, this is how we can implement. That's nothing but they were only taking care of it, judicial legislation.
Okay.
Then we have legislation under local self-government. Okay, what is local? As in, it's not center or state government, but local governments. Okay, local governments, they are taking care of their own things, like panchayats, we have municipalities. These are called as local self-government. That certain matters are there which municipalities are taking care of. Certain matters panchayats are taking care of. So they are also given that much of powers so that they can take care of themselves as self-government. They are not dependent on parliament for everything. Whatever things are entrusted to them, they are able to take care of it. Like municipalities would take care of maybe cleanliness of the that municipal area, right? That's nothing but a power given to them. So they will make laws, rules relating to that within their area, like giving vaccines
Got
to stray dogs, or some operations would be done. All those are taken care of by municipalities, right? So they might pass some rules or regulations relating to it.
Ma'am,
Legislation.
one example, one
Hmm.
question, ma'am.
Hmm.
If Supreme Court's order is there, ma'am,
Hmm.
like pending until the further notice, everyone should follow this. Does it go under order, ma'am?
The Supreme Court's order is pending.
Like not or the case is pending, ma'am. The last hearing says that uh, this should be followed until further notice.
Yeah.
Some rule should be followed until further notice.
Hmm.
That rule becomes a rule, no, ma'am. which is pending basically.
That usually becomes binding on the parties only, like whatever orders court pass, right, in between the case, that usually is binding on the disputing parties only, not like in general it becomes binding. Or sometimes if there is like a controversy on a legal question and court says this is what is to be followed, then yes, those orders also can be considered as law. So when we say law, it's not just legislation, a lot of other things are included. Orders can also be included there.
Like for example, ma'am,
Hmm.
hijab ban issue,
Hmm.
and now let's not take that decision of Karnataka.
Hmm.
It Supreme Court says that not to wear hijab until the further notice.
Hmm.
That's kind of a rule, no, ma'am.
Yes,
That
that's
not
kind
to
of
wear.
a rule. Correct. That's kind of a rule. In fact, that is what happened in Karnataka also. Before the High Court decided the matter, some department of the government said that let's, like maintain peace because schools and colleges were shut down for 3-4 days. Let's not hamper education for this matter, but rather let's just, like follow the procedure until High Court decides on the matter. That's also nothing but what should be obeyed because a certain authority has said that.
Okay, okay, ma'am. Got it. Thank
Yeah. Legislation under local self-government. So local self-government bodies are offered powers to make bylaws. We call it as bylaws because these are applicable on those specific bodies only. Like if a municipal corporation passes a law, it's applicable in that municipal area. So we call it as a bylaw. If university passes a legislation that's binding on students of that university, we call it as bylaws. Okay.
Okay.
So local self-government bodies are also offered powers to make bylaws concerning their neighborhood matters. Bylaws made by neighborhood body works in its individual area only. For example, municipal corporations, municipal boards, Jilla Parishads, panchayats, whatever laws they pass, it's binding on that area only. Okay, like a municipal corporation saying that throwing garbage on the road, you will be fined 500 rupees. Or they might say that, okay, if you are seeing anybody throwing garbage, you can click a picture of that person and send it to us, and we will take action against that person and we will reward you. That's also nothing but a bylaw that's applicable, that based on your picture, action would be taken on that person, right? Municipal this might say that plastic is banned from this date, it should not be used. All of that is nothing but bylaws passed by them. So it is legislation under local self-government.
Okay.
Laws made by such bodies come under municipal legislation, for example, town planning, etc. Town planning might say that, okay, this certain thing needs to be taken permission, this certain thing needs this kind of a registration. A lot of procedures are there. Okay, for construction, maybe these are guidelines you need to follow, these are permissions, approvals you need to take. Whatever is mentioned, it's applicable in that specific area.
Okay.
So this is nothing but legislation under local self-government. Then we have something called as autonomous legislation. You might have heard of autonomous universities. Have you heard of it?
Yes, ma'am. Like Christ University.
Yes, they are autonomous universities,
Yes.
as in they are running themselves, right? So the in exceptional cases, legislative powers of the state are delegated to certain entities or bodies like universities, companies, corporations, etc., to make bylaws for regulating their business. It is also known as autonomous legislation. So what all rules, regulations will be followed in that university, they will decide it themselves, they will take care of it themselves. That's applicable to them. What all would be the policies in a company, they will decide it. Working time, whether 3 shift would be allowed, whether 1 shift, night shift allowed, not allowed, all of that companies would decide. That's nothing but their own things that they would decide. Corporation, different organizations may also have their own bylaws, right? All of these are nothing but which helps them to take care of their work, right? To take care of their business. These are nothing but autonomous legislations.
Okay.
Okay, like what would be the procedure for taking admission in Christ University? Whether it would be one interview or written test would be there, or what would be there, what not would be there, they are deciding it. right? So that's nothing but a decision that they have taken regarding admissions, and it's applicable to them. That is autonomous legislation.
Okay, ma'am.
So apart from existence of supreme legislation, it is imperative to also place due consideration to subordinate legislation. Subordinate legislations are also important, as the parliament cannot overlook and regulate the smallest function of the state. They delegate some of their powers to all these different bodies. Everything parliament cannot take care of. And this ensures that day-to-day affairs of the state are undertaken smoothly without any sort of inconvenience. We don't need to wait forever for a certain law to be passed. Quickly decisions can be taken by these bodies as well. Okay, is it clear? Any point, doubt?
No, ma'am, I don't.
Okay, so supreme and subordinate we have. Within subordinate, we have different classifications, 5 different types of legislations that we see.